when it came to giving. First of all, giving could not be refused. It's not that I couldn't refuse your giving. It's the opportunity to give, you had to give. If Lancey walked up and said, I need a sheep, and Jim's got 3 sheep, he had to give a sheep. He couldn't think about it. He didn't need to pray about it. He had to give. Because giving was mandatory. It was not even optional. Okay? That was one of the principles. And here's why. Because if Jim refuses to give a sheep to Lancey, there may come a day that Lancey's got 3 sheep and Jim needs 1. And now, because he offended her previously, she was not going to want to help him. So the idea was we all help each other so that when my time of need comes, that I've got everybody's resources and they've all got mine. In the book of Acts, it says that the New Testament church, they gathered together and they gathered all their stuff. They put it in a big heaping pile, looked like a big Goodwill, okay? Everybody brought their stuff, and it says that everybody had what they needed. Okay? So if Jim's got 3 sheep, Lancey needs 1, now Lancey's got 1, James got 2. But if someday down the road, hopefully then Lancey's going to have 3, Jim might need 1, now she's able to help him. Okay? So that was the idea. You couldn't refuse to help because you may need help someday. Number 2, giving had to benefit the person you gave it to. Lancey needs a sheep, Jim's not allowed to give her a dog. Okay? Because she doesn't need a dog. She needs, well actually, you could eat a dog. Okay? But Lancey needs a sheep. So the point is, you had to meet her need. And the phrase they used was it had to provide for them the standard of comfort which they knew. Okay? So if Lancey needs a minivan, and James has a Prius 2-door, that doesn't meet her need. But somebody else, Patrick, may have a minivan that he needs to get rid of, and so he would give the minivan because that meets her need. It had to meet the need of the recipient, not just what makes me feel good. Number 3, giving had to be done in private. We weren't allowed to have big, to-dos and, oh, look at me, I'm driving my minivan, I'm going to put a big bow on it and put Lancey's name on the side of it. Can't do that, okay? Because it had to be done in private. And here's how they did this. In the temple, there were secret rooms that they would go into, and if people had extra bread, or they had extra food, or extra money, they would place it in these cubby holes kind of thing, and then there was a door on the outside. It wasn't inside the temple because not everybody was allowed in. So they would come into the temple courts, they called it. They would open these secret doors and they would take the bread, because they needed bread, or they would take whatever else might be in there. And it was all done in secret. The guy giving it didn't know who got it, and the guy receiving it didn't know who gave it. So there was no obligation of friendship. There was no manipulation of emotions. There was none of that. Okay? It was all done in secret. So they devised this way to protect the integrity of the receiver as well as the privacy of the donor. Okay? So it was always done in secret. It was considered rude to walk around and blow your horn and say, look at me, look at what I'm able to do. Okay? Nowadays we don't blow the horn, we just put it on the internet. Look at what I did. Okay? Or we name a building after ourselves. Okay? The manner of giving had to match the temperament of the person receiving it. Now this is kind of interesting. If you have a stingy old man who has lots of money, okay, but he lives as if he's poor, and you loan him $100, but he has $100, he just won't spend it. When he dies, we're going to take it out of his estate because he's just being stingy. It's not that he's really poor, he's just living like he's poor. Okay? We still do this. We still do this. You did something to me, you owe me money, I'm going to sue your estate. Okay? Because we're going to get back what's rightfully ours. Okay? But it has to do with the character of the person. So if the person is stingy, they would actually get the money back or get the resources back after they had died. However, if a person was too proud to ask for help, okay? And the hardest part about getting help is asking for it. Of any kind. The hardest part is admitting you need help. Okay? But here's what they would do. Here's a person who obviously needs groceries. The phrase was said to them, my son, perhaps you need a loan. What does that do? It protects the integrity of the person and the dignity of the one in need. And it was never considered that they were ever going to pay it back. It was really a gift. But it was called a loan. Never with the intention to be paid back. All in an attempt to protect the honor and dignity of the person in need. The Jewish people, so much of their rules and regulations were all about personal dignity and pride and value. And this is a classic case. So they were to go up and say, sweetheart, obviously you need some groceries. Just let me loan you some money. But they were never expected it to be repaid. Okay? All because of the recipient. And that's huge. For us, when we loan money, who do we protect? The loaner. The person giving the money is the one that wants protected. I mean, it's become a complete 180-degree switch in America, particularly. You know, my mother one time said, always, never be the borrower, always be the lender. Well, in Proverbs it says the borrower is servant to the lender. Well, I don't want those kind of relationships between me and my friends. And I would just tell you, if you loan money to friends, don't ever expect it back. If you get it back, count it a blessing. If you can't give it as a gift, then don't give it. Because if you're making it a loan, it's going to establish a relationship between you that's really weird. It's really weird. Because there'll always be this tension. There'll always be tension. And I jokingly said to you last week, if you got people you don't want to come to Thanksgiving dinner, just loan them $1,000. They'll disappear. Because it causes this weirdness. So when you loan money, give it as a gift. Don't expect it back. If you get it back, praise God for it. Okay? But it's all done to protect the person receiving the gift. Number 5, giving was a privilege and an obligation. Because when we give, we're really giving to God. And so in this way, they were able to, and their very best human possible way is to most emulate a giving God, was by caring for and giving to each other. And so the Jewish people considered it a real privilege. In fact, this was the one part of their law that didn't have a limit. Okay? It wasn't that you were allowed to choose to give. You had to give. I want you to understand this. They expected you to give. Just like the Jewish people, unless you were a scribe, you were a Hebrew man, you had to be married. Because they took the words, go and multiply, be fruitful, they took that as a command. So the only group of Hebrew people that weren't allowed to be married, men, were the scribes. That's the only group. Every other Hebrew guy had to be married. They considered the same for giving. Every person was expected to give. Every one of them. Okay? Now here's the fun. You know how we talked about the Jewish laws? They had laws about how many steps they could go, they had how many laws they could do this, they figured ways to get around this law. This is the one law for the Jewish people that had no limit. There was no limit on how much you had to give. No lid. How many times do you have to give? As long as there are people in need. You've got to keep giving, and keep giving, and keep giving, and keep giving, and keep giving. So you could see why they would want to come up with a way to figure out how to limit that. They would want to put a lid on it so that they could hold on to their resources. Okay? So here's what they would do. They made up some ideas. First of all, they wouldn't give to people that were just lazy. If my giving to you allows you to be lazy, I'm not going to give it to you. I'm not going to enable you to be lazy. And this is a New Testament principle. It says if a man won't work, he shouldn't eat. Okay? If your body works, go find a way to make a living. That's the New Testament model. Okay? And the Hebrew people put that into action. I'm happy to help you, but I'm not going to help you do nothing. I'm going to help you get better. And so rather than helping them stay sick, so to speak, they would withhold help. That was one way that they put a limit on it. The second thing they would do is they would only give it through official channels. Okay? We still do this in America. And what they would do is, rather than give it to the person directly, they would give it to a mediator person who would then give it to that person, and that was the way they got around it. For example, let's say that Rudy needs $100, okay? And let's say Ray is going to give him $100, okay? So Ray would give it to the church, the temple, and then the temple would give it to Rudy, okay? The problem with that is two things. One is that's a safe way for Ray to give it, right? And it's a safe way for Rudy to receive it because they don't know who it's coming from. True? The bad part is it's not good for Ray because his heart's not involved. It's a lot easier to write a check than it is to go down to the gospel mission and serve food. It's a lot easier to write a check and support our kids going on a missions trip than it is for a bunch of us to get into the short yellow bus and go downtown and help homeless people. It's a lot easier for us to write a check to the girl that's over in Italy than it is to go over there and work. It's a lot easier to do something anonymously than to get your heart broken and your hands dirty. And so as good as it sounds that this system is good for Rudy, it's really not good for Ray because his heart's not involved. I just write a check and I'll just give it. Okay? And second thing that it does is it puts the temple in a really weird position. Okay? And I don't know if you know this or not, but in the United States, legally, you cannot walk up to me and hand me $1,000 to the church and say, I want you to give this to Pastor Colin. You can't do that. If you write